This is John Jackson Miller, author of novels for Star Wars and Star Trek, and you're listening to The Nerd Byword.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. I'm Kris, he's Dave. He speaks German and English. I speak Spanish, English, a little bit of Klingon, but we can both talk nerdy to you. We are ready for you with another fantastic interview, this time with New York Times bestselling author John Jackson Miller. He's written comics and novels for Star Wars. He's written novels for Star Trek. So you don't have to pick between the two. You can love both, nerds. And we're talking to him about his brand new, just released 2 weeks ago, novel, Star Trek Discovery, Die Standing. But first, it's not a Nerd Byword episode without nerd news. And Dave is headed to the Valley of Plenty. What do you have for us, Dave?
I'm going to go ahead and toss you some nerdy news. The Witcher looks to be getting not one, but 2 different spin-offs. The streaming service announced a new 6-part limited series titled The Witcher Blood Origin. Here's the official description. Set in an elven world 1200 years before the world of The Witcher, Blood Origin will tell a story lost to time, the origin of the very first Witcher, and the events that led to the pivotal conjunction of the spheres when the worlds of monsters and men and elves merged to become one. Declan DeBarra will act as executive producer on this show, as well as showrunner. He previously wrote the Witcher Season 1 episode of Banquets, Bastards, and Burials, and worked on shows such as The Originals. Witcher showrunner Lauren Hisrich will act as an executive producer on the new project. And of course, franchise creator Andrzej Sapkowski will serve as a creative consultant. Now, I'm a big fan of both the Witcher books and the Netflix adaptation. I sometimes struggle to get into fantasy stories as much as I do science fiction, but The Witcher hooked me from the word go. So I'm really excited that there will be more Witcher coming, including Blood Origin, and then the previously announced anime prequel, Nightmare of the Wolf, which is rumored to focus on Geralt of Rivia's mentor, Vesemir. The only real problem I see here is that a lot of the success of the Netflix adaptation rested on the pitch-perfect portrayals of Henry Cavill as Geralt, and of course all the other actors involved in this series. So without those characters and those actors, it seems like it'll be a little more difficult for some of these spin-offs to hook the viewer. Still, I hope that the shows manage to capture the spirit of the franchise in such a way as to hold my interest and become wildly successful in their own right. Kris, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm stoked for this. I watched all, 8 episodes of The Witcher? I watched it all in like a 24-hour period. So it was fantastic for me. And I immediately went to Xbox Game Pass and downloaded The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. So I'm interested, and that's my only exposure to the video games. I'm still in progress. I have so many nerdy projects during quarantine that I'm reading comics, playing video games, reading novels, but I'm still in the beginning parts of the first novel as well. But I'm super stoked. I mean, like, this is, from my understanding, this is a never-before-told story. And that can be a bit thin ice, but with Andrzej Sapkowski, serving as a creative, person on this, he's directly involved. I hope it gets its full, fruition here. I'm really interested to see, like, this whole elven, part. I'm a big fantasy fan. Lord of the Rings, I love it. I'm all here for it. And I'm interested to see this common thread of, like, mankind, being this tumultuous, cataclysmic thing in so many fantasy settings. You have it with the Lord of the Rings and their greed with the One Ring, and then you have also in Game of Thrones, like the White Walkers were created because of what man was doing, and now you have Declan DeBarra saying, what was the elven world really like before the cataclysmic arrival of the humans? So, like, what is it about mankind that keeps screwing up, all of these fantasy worlds? So, and the title as well, The Witcher Blood Origin, that just sounds cool, and I'm definitely going to want to check in. I totally get what you're saying with the characters of Geralt's not being here. This is way before that. Henry Cavill's portrayal of this gives me hope for the DCEU going forward when he's given, substantive material, and it just further underlines what disservice he's been done, feeling like the DC films as Superman. But the actress who plays Yennefer as well, and even like the minor characters are so wonderful. But the hope that gives me for that is some of the same creative team being behind this. So I'm super excited for this, and I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a lot to be excited about right now in the nerd world. There's also a lot of stuff to be disappointed with quite deeply, which brings us to your nerd news segment. Kris, what have you got for us?
Yeah, we're getting, usually on the Nerd Byword, we like a peek behind the curtain, but this is one of those times where we get a peek behind the curtain and you're horrified at what you see. Daredevil actor Peter Shinkoda accuses former Marvel TV head Jeff Loeb of making anti-Asian comments. There was a hashtag Save Daredevil Comic-Con at Home panel, which Peter Shinkoda was a part of. Daredevil fans will know him as Nobu from the Netflix series. And he revealed that Loeb had instructed writers to scrap plans for a storyline that would delve deeper into Nobu's relationship with Madame Gao, who was brought to the screen by Wai Ching-ho. And I'm quoting here from the Yahoo article from Margot Sipel. Jeff Loeb told the writers' room not to write for Nobu and Gao, and that it was reiterated many times by many of the writers and showrunners that he said, nobody cares about Chinese people and Asian people. There were 3 previous Marvel movies, a trilogy called Blade that was made where Wesley Snipes killed 200 Asians each movie. Nobody gave an expletive, so don't write about Nobu and Gao, Shinkoda said, and they were forced to put their storyline and drop it. And this is just, it turns my stomach even reading these quotes. Not only because of the despicable, portrayals and treatment of an entire group of people. But this is, as you dig deeper into an individual like Jeff Loeb, who, as we said off camera, is responsible for some really monumental stuff in the nerd community. Batman: The Long Halloween, Spider-Man Blue. These are big, seminal, comic runs, and being behind the television as well. Daredevil was a massive hit to where you have, another popular hashtag was Save Daredevil. And it's another one of those things in this day and age where we have to separate the art from the artist. The article goes on to say that he showed up to Comic-Con in some kung fu attire that was seen as offensive. And here, this one really got me as well. Peter Shinkoda went on to tweet that he and his co-star Wai Ching-ho, Madame Gao, were not even invited to the Daredevil Season 2 premiere. He appeared in 3 Season 2 episodes, including the finale, was a major part of the second season. And he said, Wai was insulted, and that pissed me off a lot. We found out about the live event as it live streamed. So they were integral characters of this series, and were not even invited to be a part of any of the press release or anything. And it's just mind-blowing. And for me, as a fan of Marvel, and of the Marvel Netflix shows, it's just sickening to me, especially because I think that Madame Gao's character and Wai Ching-ho's portrayal of her is one of the best things about that entire universe that they built on Netflix. This is a very low bar, but the one of the few things that worked about the Iron Fist series was Madame Gao. She's just a screen chewer. Like, she is one of those actors that you stop what you're doing and you pay attention when she is on screen. And for this to come out and for this to be the true treatment of those two individuals and for Asian people at large, it's just infuriating to me. So this is the second week in a row that I'm enraged about something.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want this to become the Angry Nerd podcast, but it is very frustrating that those sorts of attitudes continue to linger, especially when it comes to people in charge of creative endeavors. Because ultimately, besides just being a horrible and plain wrong attitude to have towards a group of people, it's also incredibly creatively limiting, ultimately. And I would say more Madame Gao, for example, would have been perfectly fine by me on any of the Netflix shows, because like you said, it's a fantastic character, fantastically portrayed. It's really hard to kind of wrap my head around Jeff Loeb and his career, as so much of his stuff, particularly in his collaborations with Tim Sale, were so evocative and emotionally affecting and sensitive even in a lot of ways. And I'm thinking like Spider-Man Blue, for example, or even Superman for All Seasons, which really almost feels like it speaks to the soul. And then to hear of him saying these kinds of things, it's hard to reconcile the art with the artist. So I'm not quite sure what ultimately is going on in Jeff Loeb's mind. I'm very troubled by the kinds of things he's then saying while in charge of Marvel's television output, basically. And it's very difficult to go back and revisit some of the things that he has written that I have always connected with and enjoyed a great deal.
Yeah, my only hope is that going forward that we as fans and the creative, powers that be will learn from this and grow. I mean, and that's, we talked about this last week is like diagnosing this infection and this disease for what it is and growing and admitting mistakes and going forward and growing. And just like the sheer cultural appropriation of Asian culture and like things that we admire, and then to treat and speak about people the way you do is just so regrettable and so disgusting. And I just hope that we have Shang-Chi on the horizon in the MCU whenever we get started again with this. I really hope that Marvel sees this as an opportunity to grow and as an opportunity to take their time and even take this quarantine and do this the right way. And as far as Asian representation in superhero films, which are criminally underserved and criminally misportrayed. So I just hope this can be a growth opportunity going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would love to see Shang-Chi being on the level of something like Black Panther. Something that actually does justice and really shows some good representation in the superhero movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And bringing in the Mandarin and all the things that come in with that are hopefully going to add to that as well. All right, ladies and gents, that wraps up our Nerd News segment. When we return from our first break, we're going to sit down with John Jackson Miller, author of Star Trek Discovery, Die Standing, a brand new novel. Stick around. Welcome back, noble nerds and ladies, to the Nerd Byword podcast. We are here with yet another fantastic interview for you. New York Times best-selling author John Jackson Miller is here. You know him from his work on the Star Wars comic books and novels. He also works on Star Trek novels, the latest of which is Star Trek Discovery, Die Standing. Tells of the story of Emperor Philippa Georgiou of the Terran Empire. John, thank you so much for stopping by the show today.
Hey, glad to be here.
We'd love to start at the beginning. Every nerd loves a good origin story. In fact, that was our first episode. We took the whole time together to tell about where our nerd origin story began. So what first got you interested in writing?
Well, I've drawn and written my own comics basically since I started collecting comics at age 6. So I've sort of had my own little, I've got folders, a whole file cabinet full of the mini comics that I used to draw, and then later in high school I was part of the small press wave. This is back before web comics. People would photocopy their comics and send them around to other people. Also, of course, in there I was a fan of science fiction. I watched the Star Trek TV show, of course, in reruns, and the Star Wars movies. The kind of the first grown-up comic book I ever got was Star Wars #1, the very first Marvel adaptation issue back. I think I was 9 years old at the time. Anyway, so Star Wars and Star Trek, wax and wane through my, childhood and teenage years in terms of what's becoming more important or less important in the pop culture. Star Wars goes away for a while, but then Star Trek gets Next Generation, and in the movies and everything, and all of this ends up, culminating in my professional life. I was the editor of my high school newspaper, went on to be the editor of my college newspaper, and after a few side trips to other places in academia, I ended up working as an editor for a trade magazine. Got hired as the editor of the trade magazine for the comics industry in 1993. Comics Retailer was the name of the magazine. Comics Buyer's Guide was our sister magazine, the newspaper that I had been reading for years and years and years. And so I got to work on that and learn from Don and Maggie Thompson, who were the editors of CBG. And then when Don passed, Maggie was sort of my mentor for the business, and I did that for a good, almost a decade. Also edited other magazines that we had, like Scry, the card game magazine. And so, of course, that was something where I was, getting involved with, not just the Star Wars comics, but the Star Wars games and the Star Trek games and everything else that was out there. Somewhere in the early 2000s, I got a chance to pitch a storyline of Marvel, and that ended up becoming the Crimson Dynamo comic series. Crimson Dynamo being an Iron Man villain. That was a mini series that led to me getting to write a year on Iron Man, which is pretty much significant, mainly because it introduced a number of characters that would show up in the movies later on, including the villain from one of the villains from the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. And so that was kind of cool because they brought me and my wife and also the artist up from Argentina to that premiere. So that was really cool. But Iron Man opened the door to working at Star Wars comics for Dark Horse. Once you've done Star Wars comics, that kind of opens you up to working for the games and also for fiction. And I then started writing prose books for Del Rey, the Lost Tribe of the Sith short stories. That leads to the Knight Errant series of comics and the novel that I wrote for Star Wars as well. And then we go on to freestanding novels like Kenobi and A New Dawn. Star Trek becomes available at that point, and I've now written 6 Star Trek novels So I've been keeping my passport stamped with all these different universes.
Absolutely. Now, I'm absolutely fascinated by a sort of a side branch of some of the work you're doing. In one of our episodes, we were talking specifically about how we can improve sales in the comic book industry. And when I was doing research, I came across the website Comicron and cited that extensively. What got you interested in sort of doing work with that website in comic book circulation history and that kind of research?
I was an obsessive compulsive record keeper as a kid, as a collector. I've got a big notebook here that has, where I recorded every comic book that I got in high school and where I bought it from, and I was tracking, what comic shop I bought from the most, or how many I bought at conventions, and how many of what publishing company. When I got to Comics Retailer Magazine, the industry was actually coming down from its all-time high. We had kind of a bubble market in the business in the early 90s. So we had this collapse going on, and I was running this business magazine, so I was having to keep all kinds of records about what was happening then. And also there was a period where you could only get the Marvel comics from the distributor that Marvel owned. So it was not possible to build a sales chart with everybody in it. I did some work so that was possible to do again. And that led to me doing monthly sales charts, which ran unbroken from September of 96 to March of 2020. And it's interrupted only by the pandemic. Although I am, just before this podcast today, I've worked several hours on reconstructing what has happened in the last few months where there hasn't been data available. But I put this material out on Comicron because I want people both to understand the health of the business, the scope of the business, the size of the business. Our year in 2019 was our best since that period in the early 90s. It was very, very good. But also I do it because I want to try to protect collectors to some degree against some of what caused that crash in the early 90s. Part of it was caused by the fact that people did not know how rare things actually were. And so you've had a lot of people who were buying mountains of comic books thinking they were going to fund their college education with them. It turned out that those were books where there were 1 million copies of them. So those numbers were not easily findable before sites like mine.
And on that topic of comic book sales and everything, we spent an entire episode coming up with 3 big strategies apiece on how to drive sales and improve the comic book industry from an economic standpoint. And I know that 2019 was a good year, but do you have any strategies that pop off the top of your head at this time to help people continue that positive momentum or bounce back from a pandemic like this?
Well, that's the thing. The comics industry was fine through the middle of March. There are always areas that could be doing better. But in terms of were we producing enough, or were enough people buying the periodicals to guarantee there would still be periodicals, and thus also guarantee there would still be graphic novels in the stores, because graphic novels are mostly just collected editions of periodicals. Yeah, absolutely, that was the case. Through the end of March, we were having a very good start to 2020. We did not cause this problem. Nothing about our product in 2020, caused the position that we're in now. There is, kind of my saying about this is, if we didn't cause it, we're probably not going to be able to fix it on our own. This is something that came from outside, and it has been the case that the retailers that have been operating are doing the best they can under conditions that are vary greatly from store to store, from city to city, from state to state, and they've been able to take advantage of some financial help from the government. They need a lot more. And it's not just that they need a lot more, it's really that everybody needs a lot more. It's all retail that needs the help. It's going to be something where, it will be some time before we will know what normal looks like. And so, we've kind of gone from, the kind of questions that you would ask, 6 months ago, how can we help comics sell better or reach more people, are different questions now. Now it's how can we get our comics to the people who want to buy them, that we already have, our current audience. How do we get those people to be able to get those books? And in many cases there are obstacles which just don't have anything to do with what's within the power of the stores or the publishers. The industry, as Will Eisner used to put it, has nearly died 3 times. The way I always follow that up with is each time we invented a way out of it, we did something brand new to get out of it. In the 1950s, when television basically destroyed comics as a mass medium, and you also had the Comics Code and everything, what we did to innovate our way out of it was to basically focus on one portion of the audience, teenage boys with superhero comics. That's what we did, and that caused comics to flourish again in the 60s, the silver age of comics. In the 70s, we were nearly collapsing again because the newsstand distribution system was going to heck. It was falling apart. Places that used to sell comics didn't want to sell them anymore. We innovated our way out of it by collectors starting their own retail stores, and publishers selling directly to those stores. And then in the 90s, after that crash happened, when things were falling apart again, what happened? We invented this, and it had been around, but we didn't focus on it. We took the graphic novel, the collected edition, and we realized, hey, this is our way to get back into bookstores. This is our way to make money off of everything we've ever published, by putting all of those old back issues that people used to have to hunt for into collected editions. And over the course of the first part of this decade, or the first part of the century, rather, a lot of the rebound in comics was fueled by, trade paperbacks coming out with everything that had ever been printed. So, we now have a new challenge, and the question is this going to be something that we'll innovate our way out of on our own, or is it going to be something so much bigger it's going to require the whole economy to be fixed? And I've tended to think it's more on the whole economy. It's not that people suddenly stopped wanting comic books in print. They still want them. They just don't have any money because we've got 30 million unemployed, or we have stores where people can actually you can't get more than 5 people in the store at once or something like that. There are stores that. It's not like there's just one kind of comic shop. There are 2,000 different models for comic shops out there, and everyone is different. There are ones that are dependent upon in-store gaming, and that's not going to come back anytime soon. So basically it really, what the situation is depends on who you are and where you're at. And it will be a while before it all comes back at the same time.
Now, just to change gears for a second, we'd love to talk a little bit about Star Wars since you have spent so much time in that particular universe. What to you is the appeal of telling new stories in the Star Wars universe? What keeps you still going with that? What keeps you interested? What keeps it fresh for you?
Well, the idea behind tie-in stories, the idea that the tie-in novel, the very first one was, I believe, was back in the 1930s for the Lone Ranger radio show. And the guy that actually created that series wrote the novels. And the whole idea was, here, can we make a little bit more money with this stuff? And also, is there a way, particularly for movies and TV shows, for the kids, the people who love this property, to continue to enjoy it, even when they're not in the theater or, the TV season is over or something like that. It's true that when I started buying Star Wars comics that were, original stories by Archie Goodwin or one of the other creators that Marvel put out, that was the only way to enjoy Star Wars for several years there, because we didn't have VCRs, we didn't have, or at least I didn't have a VCR at the time. The idea of getting to relive that experience was going to happen secondhand through something else. It just sort of, it came about that, Star Wars and Star Trek as well, ended up being the standard bearers for science fiction in comics. And they also ended up being some of the, best science fiction being written in prose as well. Those early Star Trek novels that came out in the 80s, the ones that all had numbers on the spines, it's not well known that a lot of those novels, which were by famous science fiction authors, were not originally proposed as Star Trek novels. They were originally just going to be regular novels, and Pocket Books said, "Hey, can you rewrite it as a Star Trek novel?" Because we know there's a built-in audience there of people who want that entertainment. People who want those kind of stories, and so I guess I enjoy working with these franchises the same way that I enjoyed reading things in those franchises. These are characters that we all know about, that we can all hear in our heads, it's sort of a way of doing things. I mean, we didn't get to see what happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi on the first month on Tatooine, but we've got my book, we've got my audiobook as well, based on that. There's just all these different ways that we can expand on the stories in these franchises, and I've been honored to be able to be a part of it.
Now, Star Wars famously is one of the most divisive fandoms in pop culture. And you need look no further than the Star Wars prequels for, a source of that derision. And Dave and I just spent 3 episodes, quote-unquote, fixing the Star Wars prequels. What's your take on the prequels?
Obviously they're what George wanted to do, and whatever George wanted to do, he's free to do it. The creator doesn't have to tell the story that I want him to tell. And it's the same with my own books. I have to say that a prequel sets up a challenge for you, and that you already know where certain characters are going to wind up, and so everything then becomes about the how and the why and sort of the style, the way you do it in. I think my dream for the prequels would have been to basically, people say, when they got the machete version, they chop off the first film. Well, I would go deeper than that. I actually would make the third movie the whole trilogy, and basically start that year because there's that much material. There's a lot of material there. But George wanted to tell the story of Anakin as a child. George wanted to tell the story of Anakin growing up. You wouldn't be able to tell the same sorts of things about him, and of course it also wouldn't have allowed for the big range of things they've been able to do in the Clone Wars, in the cartoon series. So yeah, I mean it's always challenging when people know what's going to happen. I've had to deal with that. Knights of the Old Republic, my comic series. We know that there's this looming threat of what happens in the video games, but we're a good ways away from it yet when I'm doing it. Certainly Star Trek, my last two novels, The Enterprise War and Die Standing, they fit into specific time frames where, in both cases, the main characters have to be somewhere. In the second season of Discovery, and almost at the same time, actually. And so in both cases, it's more about, how can I surprise you with what happens to them in that time period.
Yeah, I can see that. Prequels in general and in-between quels would be extremely difficult to write. I wanted to take a moment and latch onto your novel Kenobi a little bit. Writing a novel about Obi-Wan's exile on Tatooine is a really interesting proposition. How did that come about, and what was it like to kind of dig into Kenobi settling into Tatooine?
Well, that actually began as a graphic novel. It was going to be a comic book for the Dark Horse was about to celebrate, I think, its 20th anniversary, so it would have been 2007. I proposed this thing in 2006, literally with the description line, the Ben Kenobi Western. That was what I had put in the email message. And I went through 3 different drafts of it, each one getting successively longer and longer and longer. And by the time my editor switched to the Indiana Jones office and gave me the Indiana Jones movie to write instead, or actually to write the adaptation for instead. By that point, we had both missed the 20th anniversary, and also my plot was way too long to ever fit into a 96-page comic book graphic novel. And so I put it on the shelf, and it came about that they were looking for novels in 2012 that brought back or focused on the main characters, and I dusted that off the shelf and did not have to make a whole lot of changes, and it turned out that it fit really well in comics format, or not in comics, but in novel format, and sort of the rest is history.
Now, in the novel Kenobi, you told the story not from Obi-Wan's point of view, but from the point of view of the people he encountered. What made you decide to go in that type of direction?
Well, it was always going to be like that in the comic book too, but it would have been more challenging to pull off. I think part of what I wanted to do is make our time with Obi-Wan more valuable. One of the things that I learned at the very beginning was that a little Darth Vader goes a long way. A little of each of these major characters goes a long way. And you don't want to have them in every scene doing something. Spock kind of works the same way in Star Trek, where you want to use them, very, carefully. And so, I think, doing it in prose made it easier to tell that kind of story. My editor suggested, I had just one sequence with the meditation originally. She said, let's do a lot more meditations to actually give him time to, time in the middle of the book where he could talk directly to the reader. Because, again, the reader knows everything that's happened in the rest of the galaxy. The reader actually knows more about what's happened than Obi-Wan does. the reader knows Darth Vader is still alive. Obi-Wan doesn't even know that at this point. I thought that the idea of having other people, evaluating him and showing how they reacted to him, I thought that would be very interesting. It was certainly a risk. In the first draft, Obi-Wan doesn't appear until 60 pages in, and we said, well, let's at least put a prologue in there where he could appear, but we can also kind of get the reader ready for the notion that this is not going to be your usual kind of book. That this is going to be a book where there's no lightsaber fights, there's no space battles. This is more about he's the mysterious stranger who wanders into town trying to escape a past. That's a very, very Western trope.
For many years, the torch of Star Wars was really carried by people like you who were working in the expanded universe. And so much of what people today understand about Star Wars has at least some kind of roots in the expanded universe. For example, the planet Coruscant. So when Disney bought Star Wars and it decided to wipe the slate clean, you as an author who has actually contributed to the expanded universe, how did you feel about that decision?
Well, I ended up writing the first novel in sort of this Lucasfilm Story Group era. That was the New Dawn novel, and I was 2/3 of the way through writing the novel because it was a novel that would be a prequel to the Rebels TV series. I was 2/3 of the way through when I was told, okay, yeah, we're going to. We're going to make this change. We're going to call everything previous to this Legends. And by the way, we're going to fly you and Timothy Zahn out to Hollywood, not to Hollywood, but to Lucasfilm in San Francisco to do a video about it. The way that it's described is really more the case. Instead of wiping the slate clean, what they've done is they've said that a legend is something which might be true in part, in whole, or not at all. It is something that is out there to draw upon if we need to draw upon it, and if it makes sense to draw upon it. I kind of look at all the previous works as being the same as what Timothy Zahn was given when he started the Heir to the Empire novels. He was given the West End role-playing game. He was given all the source books for it because they had already, come up with all this stuff, names of planets and things, and he drew upon it. You're writing a new adventure, just like a role-playing, game master writing a role-playing game. Well, I kind of look at the Legend stuff like that too. These are all source books that we can draw from. It's not necessarily the case that they're all, correct or true or whatever. The fact that we bring in one character from something doesn't, deem it all, canonical or whatever. But I mean, I've now done 2 stories bringing in characters from the Kenobi novel, because the short story I did for the Certain Point of View book for Star Wars, that brought in a Yark, my character from Kenobi, the Tusken Raider, and then we had in the Canto Bight novella I did, I brought back Mosep Benid, who dates back not only through Kenobi, where he's Jabba's accountant, but he goes all the way back to the very first Marvel Comics story arc. Because he was originally going to be Jabba in the comics until they decided that Jabba would be this big slug guy. So that's a character with a lot of very strange backstory.
Now, there's even been talk about a Kenobi series coming to Disney Plus. Do you hope the show takes some inspiration from your novel, or that they go in a different direction? What are your hopes for that?
They can do whatever they want. They own it all. I will say that the decisions that I made were right for me, and I do not rule out that there are other ways to tell his story. In my thinking, Obi-Wan Kenobi is best when he is a hermit, when he is on Tatooine, and when he does not leave. They had some children's novels where, and this is in the Legends era, where Obi-Wan was traveling around doing things. I kind of felt like, that's not how I would do it, because I think it lessens his exile. I mean, it's this is the joke I say is, Andy Dufresne and Red do not get to run off to Boston on the weekends for Shawshank Prison. They've got to actually stay there for their time there to mean anything, or to mean what it does. And so, I figure, as Obi-Wan says, he's not the new hope. He's the hope that failed. He's got one job now, and his job is to take care of Luke.
Now, to switch gears again, you've also written several Star Trek novels. We've mentioned this several times, including your newest book, Star Trek Discovery Dies Standing. What can you tell us a little bit about the thought process going into writing this particular book, about this particular character at that particular moment in her journey?
Oddly, I have realized that there are parallels to the Kenobi novel. Obi-Wan Kenobi had been at the bright center of the universe, and now suddenly he's living in the hinterlands. He had been a part of things, and suddenly he is not. He's lost everything, and he blames himself for what's happened, even though it wasn't necessarily his fault. With Emperor Giorgio in the mirror universe in Star Trek, this is a character who has lost more than anybody has ever controlled, more than anybody has ever owned. She owned the entire known universe at the time that her rule was summarily ended with the events that we see in that first season of Discovery, and she has to flee as a refugee to what she would consider to be Tatooine, our universe, and so that's where she is. And of course, the difference is, obviously, one of them has a much darker perspective, but the question that they both face is, how do I continue being the person I was? How do I continue doing the things I knew how to do in this new place? In Kenobi's situation, he has to learn to give up being a Jedi, because he cannot do all the things he used to do, but he can do some things on the margins. He can do some things carefully, and basically, act not as Superman, but act as Clark Kent when he can. In her case, her immediate reaction is to reject this new situation and to try to regain what she had. And that was what I felt would be her arc in this book all along. Is somebody like this doesn't just go to work for somebody else, whether it's Section 30 or Section 31 or anything else. If she did agree to work for them, it would be with the ulterior motive that she thinks it'll make escaping easier, or she thinks she'll find something that's going to help her, reconquer this universe. And it'll be easier this time because our universe is very trusting and not very, not like the mirror universe at all. Well, and that's what happens. And that's our plot, is she discovers something in our universe that eluded her in hers. And it's a weapon, and she thinks that if she gets a hold of it, it will change her destiny. But, the course of this novel takes her on an odyssey, towards seeing that, maybe that's not what she wants anymore.
Now, I have to say, your cast for this novel is probably the most surprising thing about Die Standing. First and foremost, it focuses on the mirror universe or evil version of Philippa Georgiou. That's always been a personal favorite of mine. Alternate universes, Thomas Wayne being Batman in Flashpoint, Spider-Verse, multiple different versions of Spider characters. How did you approach writing an evil character as a protagonist, and like the opposite of Star Trek proper, Philippa Georgiou, who's a consummate Federation officer? What's your approach on that?
Well, one of the things that is necessary to do in any kind of alternate universe situation is you need to know when things split off. And so, for example, in the movies, you've got the Kelvin universe. Everything changes when, in Star Trek, the movie, when, you have the disaster aboard the Kelvin. But everything before that is a common thing. I needed to find out, with this thing, exactly when things split. And what I found out was, as a fan, I had always assumed, like a lot of people I think did, that the best place to have done that, breaking point, would have been, City on the Edge of Forever, Edith Keeler. If she lives, that's the universe that would have been created, the fascistic universe that that Spock sees when he's looking at the future record tapes. That would have been, that would have been a place to have it from. However, they had a show called Enterprise, and they had a little fun with it, where they not only showed us that First Contact was different, so that takes it, at least to the after the Third World War, but then they have the opening sequence where they show more or less that the history has always been this way. There are multiple references in that Enterprise two-parter to Shakespeare and various other characters from the distant past. And we realize that, okay, this has been the situation for a very long time. These people are just different. And their world has been different for a very long time. And so, I got to, even though my book does not spend a lot of time in the Mirror Universe, I talk a lot about, the culture that she was coping with beforehand. What things like what life insurance meant, in her universe. It was a different thing. Yes, life insurance was insurance to prevent, insurance just in case your children did not conquer the galaxy, or you didn't conquer the galaxy, in case your life was wasted. So it's in a sense, I had been prepped for writing it because I did that Lost Tribe of the Sith thing for Star Wars, where everybody in it was Sith, so everybody in it was nasty and everything. But I enjoyed doing it, and also getting to because people like reading about characters who know things. People like reading about characters who know how to do things. She's very skilled at everything she does. And I put her in a series where the people she's up against or with at any one point in time range from people who really don't know much of anything, like one of her henchmen in this book, and then we've got a character like Quintillion who can go beat her reference for reference when it comes to historical figures, and so I think that it's an interesting place to spend some time for a year.
Now, you also brought in two characters that, at least just from looking at the cover, I did not expect to find in a Discovery novel at all. The first was Dax, an earlier incarnation of Dax from Deep Space Nine. And then, the big surprise, of course, was Sean Finnegan, who was basically just a one-off character from the original series. How did you settle on using these specific characters and pairing them with Emperor Georgiou?
Those actually were suggested to me as characters I could use if I wanted to. Because everything here, I was in conversation with both my editor Margaret Clark and also Kirsten Beyer at the Discovery Writers Room and then also Dayton Ward, who is sort of a go-between these days. It was determined after my first draft of the plot, not the novel itself, that we had wanted to get some name characters in there, but we didn't know who was available, and they were on the list of who was available, and it occurred to me that they would be very good for traveling companions for Georgiou, both because they're just wildly different from her. Dax is the conscience that she doesn't have, and Finnegan is just unbridled id and joy and poor decision making. He's all of this, and they also both represent characters who are dealing with loss in the same just as she is. They're dealing with it in different ways, though. I mean, Dax comes from a people whose entire life cycle is about starting over. You live a life, you begin again. You live a life, you begin again with the same memories, and they live for it. It's what they want. Starting over is not a bad thing for them. And then Finnegan, there's we don't actually quote it, but we won't quote it directly. But there's a reference to a Chumbawamba song in there. I get knocked down, but I get up again. This is what he does. He's a brawler. He takes it on the chin constantly. He's hit in the face multiple times in this book. But also, he's somebody who's been thrown out of Starfleet and brought back in, thrown out of Starfleet, brought back in, and he's fine with it because, that's all good. Let's go again, all right? And so, yeah, I think he's an interesting character for her to confront because he is not somebody who wallows in despair, in loss, in anything. Although we do hit him with some rough patches for him in the book, it's not the case that he ever gives up, and she doesn't either.
Die Standing is a Discovery novel, and some Star Trek fans have been vocal online that Discovery is "quote unquote" not their Star Trek. What are your feelings about that type of sentiment?
Well, they don't own Star Trek any more than I do, or anybody else, unless they're a stockholder in the CBS Corporation. Look, we all have our favorites. We all have our headcanon, but that headcanon can be challenged. I mean, for me, Rocky IV and Rocky V never existed in my universe because I felt that Apollo Creed lived, and Rocky V. Well, now with the Creed movies, Rocky IV can be in there again. So Rocky IV is back in my headcanon. 5 is still not. But
the less said about 5, the better.
Well, but I mean, this is the case. I mean, I prefer my aliens to have stopped with the second movie. But if I were to take a job, doing aliens, I would have to deal with it. Now I will say, I would be less likely to, and I have not to this point taken that job. Not that one's been offered, but I mean, I think it's really hard to fake enthusiasm. I've done video game comics as well, for I think 3 different franchises, none of which, where I was really in the gaming audience. I mean, well, Knights of the Old Republic was different because I, both read the previous Knights of the Old Republic comics. I played that game, and then also, I just knew Star Wars. I've not pursued much more with Mass Effect or with Halo. for example, just because in both cases I'm not a hardcore player of those games, and unfortunately, the kind of games I play, I don't know that there are going to be any novels or comics about. I've got thousands of hours on Civilization going.
Oh, a man after my own heart.
Well, going back all the way to Civilization 1, and actually the Avalon Hill board game long before that, where a lot of the ideas from the Civilization come from. But then lately I've been playing American Truck Simulator, so I've been driving a Peterbilt truck all around the Pacific Northwest, just because I can't get out of the house. So, but I really don't know, what fiction is going to come from that.
Now, having dealt with two big franchises like that, Star Trek and Star Wars, what to you is the elemental difference between those two things, and the big difference in writing for those two different franchises?
Well, I mean, clearly there are stories that will work in Star Trek that won't work in Star Wars, and vice versa. Star Wars is space fantasy, it's space opera. Star Trek, aspires to be science fiction to a degree. So at least the pseudoscience is there to obey certain rules, and you've got to get it right. I go through a lot of work on Star Trek to make the pseudoscience work properly. I pay attention to things like the map. I've got the map of the alpha and beta quadrants on opposite walls here in my office. So people are not just popping from one planet on one side to the other. That doesn't work. I obey a lot of things about how transporters work and how shielding works and what's where within the hull of the Enterprise, and what things, this came up a lot in the Enterprise War novel. What stuff still works if you separate the saucer from everything else? Do your transporters still work? All stuff like that. And so, you wouldn't want to write a Star Wars novel that wallows in that kind of stuff, or gets real deep into anything like that. I mean, we use gobbledygook phrases like check the Navicomputer coordinates for the hyperdrive, but we don't go any deeper than that. But then on the other hand, Star Wars and Star Trek, Star Wars, you've got a much more cosmopolitan galaxy. This is a galaxy that is already fully settled and already fully explored. So it's a galaxy that's been lived in. And so Star Wars is less about exploration. It's less about who can live in this, who lives on this planet in this time frame. Well, no, everybody lives on this planet in this time frame. It's a different kind of story, different approach.
When writing stories for corporate-owned properties like Star Wars or Mass Effect, even Star Trek, how much freedom do you have to tell your own story? I know you hinted at this previously with going back and forth with the writer's room, but what kind of limitations, for example, did you face when writing Kenobi or Die Standing even?
They're mostly laid out at the beginning in terms of, this is where you can set the story, or this is what you need to worry about running into. And as a general rule, I was told, before I even started writing Star Wars comics, by my editor, Randy Stradley, he said, when you define, you confine. When you create a fact just to create a fact, it's something that everybody else has to worry about, that follows you. And you don't want to do anything where you say, nobody has ever been to this planet before, because that ruins it for anybody who sets a story before that, and wants to go to that planet. So I try to mind the footprint that I'm working within. I try to be cautious not to close off any avenues for other storytellers, because it's possible that the door I close might be one I'll need to open myself later on.
That's very interesting. So What's next for you? Any upcoming novels or comics that you can tease for the audience?
The next book that's out in November, I am part of the, I mentioned the previous book earlier, the From a Certain Point of View hardcover we're doing for The Empire Strikes Back's 40th anniversary. I'm one of the authors in that, and I am not allowed to say what I'm writing about, but every one of these things is based on a character or scene or something that we see in the movie. And I can tell you that people who like the way that I approached my story in the one for Star Wars will find that I have gotten to have some fun with this one as well. And otherwise, I've been doing a lot of work on Comic-Con, and not just the present day. But where there's so much to try to study. But I've put in just weeks and weeks during the pandemic doing estimates on comics in the 1960s. And the hope is that I'll be able to publish something that's going to have things that we never really had before, like sales charts from back then. We've always had sort of an idea what sold. I've been able to actually discover, some real things, patterns that we probably didn't. A lot of people are going to look at this and be surprised.
Well, that's definitely something to look forward to.
Now, John, every week we give out nerd commendations, things that we're reading or things that we're enjoying, and being such a large part of comic book sales and the comic book industry, large part of geekdom, if you will. Is there anything you're reading or enjoying right now that you'd like to share with our audience?
I've been rereading Sandman. I realized it was 20 years since I've read any of that, and so I've been rereading Sandman from the beginning, and it's very interesting. It's interesting because when I read it beforehand, I had not worked as a writer, and now I'm approaching it looking at all the technical things that he did, that Neil Gaiman did, and and again wondering how he was able to come up with this stuff, because he was much younger than I am now when he was writing that material. I'm also I've had so much other stuff to do that I've been playing catch up, so I can only catch up on one series at a time. So right now I'm about 10 years behind in a fun little comic book called Knights of the Dinner Table. I'm only to issue 148, and I've got another 120 to go before I catch up. But again, my reading time is limited, and you would have thought that I would have had a lot of time during the pandemic. But yeah, those are the series that I've been going through. And again, Knights of the Dinner Table is kind of funny because it's very much Critical Role before its time. Whatever the thing is where the Dungeons and Dragons players are on YouTube just running their own universe. Well, that's kind of what that is in comic book format. And so yeah, I'm about 15 years into that. I got another 10 to go.
John, we thank you so much for your time. And thanks for being a part of the show. Is there anywhere on social media or the internet at large that our fans can find you and continue following your work?
Sure thing. My website is farawaypress.com. On Twitter, I am JJMFaraway. On Facebook, it's John Jackson Miller. And then also my Comic-Con website, COMICHRON.com. That Comic-Con also gets you to my Twitter account for that, my Facebook account for that, and my Patreon.
Again, thank you so much, John. Thanks for being part of this show. We really appreciate this.
Hey, thanks very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our interview with John Jackson Miller. Be sure to check out Star Trek Discovery, Die Standing, available wherever you get books, whether it's an audio book, an ebook, or hardcover as well. When we return from our second break, we're going to hit you with 2 more nerd commendations for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another episode with 2 more nerd commendations for you. Dave, what do you have for us?
I got something a little out of the ordinary this time that I want to talk about. Specifically, I want to talk about one Jeremy Parish's YouTube channel. Jeremy Parish has been a games journalist for quite a while. He's worked for US Gamer, IGN, 1UP, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Retro Magazine, the official PlayStation Magazine, and several other publications. He's also written several books about video games, and he also is a podcast host himself and hosts the Retronauts podcast. But I'm not really wanting to talk so much about the podcast and more about my absolute favorite Jeremy Parish project. It's his Works series on YouTube. In these series of videos, he attempts to play every game released for a particular platform in the order in which they were released. He has started series on the Nintendo Game Boy, the NES, the Super NES, and the Nintendo 64. Each video focuses on only 1 or 2 games, contains extensive research about the history of the game and its development, and then analyzes the design and gameplay of those games. I find these videos almost addictive. Much of what he is covering with these videos are the consoles I grew up with, and I constantly am learning about games I didn't know about, or history of games that I did play that I didn't know about their background. What blows my mind in particular is that this channel on YouTube only has 53,000 subscribers. It seems to be a very small channel in the annals of gaming YouTube channels. And that's really odd. I think any fan of retro video games and gaming history would enjoy these videos. So I highly recommend the channel. Parish is doing great work here, and even though it seems highly unlikely he'll ever finish these series, considering how many games he's dealing with, the journey so far has been super informative and fun.
This is fantastic, not only from a video gaming aspect, but like as a history nerds aspect. It's almost like I'm looking at the channel right now, and it's just like a glimpse back in time, and you can't help but to think like where you were when these games were released, and you know, it's so memorable, and the nostalgia is strong here. So I'm definitely gonna have to check this out. I'm not very active on YouTube, if I'm being honest. My exposure to YouTube is usually movie trailers and then walkthroughs to other video games if I'm stuck on a particular level. So I'm gonna have to expound on my YouTube, use here. Or like, fix it yourself home videos on my honeydew list. That'll. If I have to learn how to install a heating element in a dryer, I have to dabble in that as well. When during quarantine, I think you and I both had to be amateur plumbers, so to speak.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting work if you're dealing with the wrong kind of pipe. It just blows my mind that Parish only has 53,000 subscribers on YouTube. This channel is probably one of my favorites, and I actually do spend a lot of time watching content creators on YouTube, and I keep coming back to these Works videos because they're just so fascinating. So I hope maybe this shout out helps some people discover this channel. If you're into gaming, this is one of my favorites. How about you, Chris? What is your nerd commendation for this week?
I'm going a little bit out there in left field for mine. I mentioned earlier we're both history nerds. I'm recommending the Marco Polo series on Netflix. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention that this recommendation does not come with certain apprehensions. It was produced between a joint partnership with Netflix and the Weinstein Company. So, that gives me a little bit of ickiness in this recommendation, but I feel like so many other elements of this show far outweigh that association. And the number one thing, even though this is probably, categorized as historical fiction, probably not how everything went down, it's hard to say when you're, dealing with something, in the 13th century and 14th century. I'm a nerd about a lot of things. I'm also a nerd about theater and acting. And I absolutely love strong acting performances. And for such a an underwhelming performance-wise show, a show that was canceled midway through its second season, and you can tell, that's one of my criticisms of this show. In the tail end, the last couple of episodes in the second season, you could tell that they had been canceled and they were trying to wrap it up very quickly. So it goes under the radar a lot, and it is not heavily advertised on Netflix for one reason or another. But the acting performances in this show are just absolutely spellbinding. And I wanted to kind of bookend this. I opened with such a negative story about the discrimination of Asian characters and Asian people, and I wanted to end this episode in contrast on a high note on some fantastic representation of the Asian community and Asian actors. My absolute favorite actor in this series is Benedict Wong's Kubla Khan, and this 2-season series tells the story of Marco Polo in the court of Kubla Khan. And Benedict Wong as Kubla Khan is an absolute revelation. You know him as Wong from, Doctor Strange in the MCU. That's his most notable role to mainstream U.S. audiences. But he, as Kubla Khan, is just fascinating to watch. It's everything. Also, some other notable actors that you'll probably recognize as nerds. Remy High was Brad from Spider-Man Far From Home, the one who is competing for MJ's affections. He is Crown Prince Jingam, Kubla Khan's eldest son, and he's fantastic in that as well. Mahesh Jadoo as well, fantastic actor. He is one of Kubla Khan's adopted sons, and you'll recognize him as Vilgefortz in the latter episodes of season 1 of The Witcher. Just fantastic actor, absolute scene chewer. Dude knows what he's doing. Tom Wu as 100 Eyes, as the blind monk who trains Marco Polo in the martial arts. He's fantastic. And Claudia Kim as Princess Kutalun is fantastic. And then, to tie this entire episode together, we featured Star Trek Discovery, Die Standing, which centers around Emperor Philippa Georgiou. And Philippa Georgiou herself, Michelle Yeoh, is also in this series as Lotus, as this assassin, and she is incredible. Everything that Michelle Yeoh does, whether it's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, whether it is Star Trek Discovery, whether it is Marco Polo, anything that she's in, you have to tune in. You have to watch. She is incredible. So I highly recommend this series. It's a real interesting peek behind the curtain, so to speak, of what the Kubla Khan dynasty was. I really appreciate the authentic cultural representation of Mongolian culture and what it was like traveling in those nomadic things. So if you're a history nerd, whether or not it lines up factually, who cares? Just to see those things represented on screen was fascinating. And then the acting performances just bring it home. So Marco Polo on Netflix is my nerd commendation for this week.
This one was a tough one for me to see on your list. Series and movies based on history are very challenging for me to watch. Somebody who spent so much time extensively studying history, I totally understand that storytellers have to take certain liberties with the facts to tell a compelling story, but it is so distracting for me when they do while I'm watching something. It's a huge challenge. I don't think my wife particularly enjoys watching anything based on history with me because I'm basically sitting there correcting the facts the whole time. Still, so much of what is fiction in movies and stuff that is supposed to be historical but is highly fictionalized ends up somehow getting accepted by the general public as actual historical fact, and then I find myself just more frustrated than entertained. Now, based on this recommendation, I'm willing to give it a shot. I mean, I will watch Michelle Yeoh read the phone book for 30 minutes. I mean, she's just a mesmerizing actress. So, here's something interesting, though, and something I wanted to ask you about this recommendation. The first season got some incredibly bad reviews, and when I looked it up, it only stood at a 34% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 44 reviews. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the show?
I don't particularly agree with that. I will say I don't feel particularly strong in endorsing Lorenzo Riquelme's. It's hard to say. Like, I recommend the show without the title character being super strong. He's okay for me. He's not the strength. I will say, watching Benedict Wong and Michelle Yeoh, particularly, and she's in a super minor role, but Benedict Wong and Tom Wu as Kubla Khan and 100 Eyes, respectively, are worth the price of admission, if you will. But I could see where some of that, and maybe, for whatever reason, people didn't vibe with that, but for just from the perspective of appreciating good dramatic acting performances, that was enough for me.
Well, then I'm definitely going to give this a look. It sounds like a winner then.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up another week and another episode of the Nerd by Word podcast. We thank you so much for tuning in. We thank you so much for your support. We are available wherever you get your podcasts, whether that is Apple Podcasts, whether that's Spotify, TuneIn, or our website, nerdbyword.com. If you don't mind, please leave us a review and a 5-star rating. Let us know how we're doing, what you'd like to see in the future. Things that you enjoy about the show. But thanks again for tuning in.
Remember, we're also available on social media as Nerd by Word, at Nerd by Word. And we're also on there individually as at That Nerd Kris and That Nerd Dave. And we'd love to hear from you on social media as well. And just let us know how we're doing and what we can do to improve the show, or any suggestions you have for potential big talk topics.
We absolutely have some fantastic content coming your way in the next few weeks. But also make sure that you're subscribed to the show, whether that is on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or even on our website, nerdbyword.com. We had our very first giveaway for celebrating 750 Instagram followers. So congratulations to Scott Wild Baptist there for winning the Secret Wars variant cover comic. As we continue to approach, follower milestones, we're going to continue to do that. And the first step into winning those prizes and that cool swag is to make sure that you're subscribed and listening to the pod. So make sure that you're doing so. And thanks again, guys, and stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is produced by two nerds, Kris and Dave, to encompass all aspects of the nerd multiverse. The theme music was written by Al Jimenez. Our show art features original art by Ashby Design, as well as public domain comic pens. Find us online at nerdbyword.com, on Twitter at nerdbyword, and send questions and comments to nerdbyword@gmail.com.